Oh, friends, this should be a good one. So it's called The Law of Kindness. That should be good. Hopefully, it's not just another long sermon like we had. The last essay number 127, was called Progress. And I think it probably, could have said what it wanted to say in about half that time. Hopefully this one won't be the same. So this book we're reading is called American Miscellany. It's a collection of essays, and all these essays are done by different people. So we have, a different voice every time. So and always very very interesting topics. We've just finished our previous essay number 127. Yes, on progress. Yes, and now we are on essay 128. We are on page 308 of American Miscellany. So let's learn together. Let's learn about the law of kindness. The power which this law now has upon society is one of the happiest effects of the diffusion of Christian principles. With all its pride, self-seeking, and vice, it need not be doubted that there is more kindness in the world at present than at any former period of history. The annals of antiquity, while recording not a few instances of heroism and devotion, seem to hold them up rather as exceptions to the prevailing selfishness and cruelty than as examples of the general tone of society. Their heroes are exhibited as objects of wonder rather than patterns for imitation. Nowadays, mankind are gradually getting on more friendly terms with one another. They seem to have found out that there is really more pleasure, and profit too, in good nature and kindly intercourse than in blustering, quarreling, and fighting. Deeds of atrocity, which in former times were looked upon pretty much as matters of course, cannot now be committed with impunity. Cannot now be committed with impunity. Any one known to have done or sanctioned an act of wanton cruelty to a fellow creature, or even to an inferior animal, is from that moment a marked man, and cannot be tolerated in any circle, even the lowest. Society has feelings attuned to the great doctrine of human brotherhood, and will not submit to have them wantonly outraged. Hypocrisy, says an illustrious moralist, is the tribute which vice pays to virtue. And even the rudest natures must now assume at least the appearance of civility and courtesy, if they would not dwell altogether apart from their kind. The time is not long gone by when fighting was looked upon as almost the only real work men had to do upon the earth. Only a few centuries ago, our own forefathers were much more like worshippers of Thor and Odin than Christians, as they fancied themselves. Every country in Europe, every province, district, town, nay, family, had their natural enemies, with whom they deemed it quite right and proper to fight whenever the humor seized them. Up to the middle of the 15th century, hardly one of the kings of England or Scotland died a natural death. Fathers destroyed their children. Children deposed and murdered their fathers without mercy or remorse. A man's worst foes were those of his own household, and yet the perpetrators of these atrocities, so soon as they had secured their own position, went forth in high state and humor. Went forth in high state and honor, no one daring to say that they had done wrong. In our times, even the most towering ambition would utterly fail in its purposes did it seek to compass them by such unscrupulous means. Natural enemies is a term which nobody thinks of now using. If war is still defended, it is entirely on the plea of self-defense, as a coarse but necessary kind of police regulation, to check the encroachments of licentiousness, tyranny, or rapacity. We hear much less about its glorious, and a great deal more about its uselessness, impolicy, and guilt. Dueling, that most barbarous legacy of barbarian times, is fast becoming unfashionable and even odious. Penal laws about the last things cautious men like to meddle with are being gradually ameliorated. Prevention of crime, rather than the punishment of it, is now the prominent tendency of our criminal enactments, and it seems to be felt that something of pity for the criminal may be consistent with hatred of crime and the preservation of good order. For all this, we do not think the world any better than it should be, or give it one particle of credit. It is all going on, just apparently because people cannot help it, because there is a power at work stronger than the bad passions of human nature, because Christianity, in spite of all obstacles, is becoming the great law of society. In the domestic relations of life, those simplest, most spontaneous, yet most permanent of all institutions, these principles have achieved some of their noblest triumphs. Few sufficiently reflect upon what has thus been done for the elevation of the female character. Yet that revolution which raised women from the rank of man's slave to that of his companion, which unfolded all the tenderness and strength of her nature by proclaiming her an heir of immortality and a daughter of heaven, is one of the most monumentous ever achieved. But this was written in 1865, or published in 1865, but women's lib didn't happen for a long time. Okay, anyways, all right, so this was one of the most momentous moments ever achieved, I guess. It has made her a helpmeet for man, his better genius, to wean him from vice and allure him to virtue. We hesitate not to say that the true character of woman is unknown, her rights unacknowledged, beyond the boundaries of Christianity. Once step without the sphere of its operations, and we find her degraded and oppressed, and men by consequence sensual and brutalized. And exactly in proportion to the strength of its influence in any quarter is the true dignity of woman estimated, and her power appropriately exerted. If, as we devoutly believe, our mothers, wives, and daughters are, on the whole, patterns to their sex throughout the world, it needs little penetration to see whence this lofty distinction is derived. That gentle and devoted kindness, in which lies the secret of their influence, is but the reflection of the universal benevolence which Christianity inculcates, and which has won for them from the haughty lords of creation something like an equality of privileges. In the mode in which the education of children is now conducted, very great improvements are perceptible. We do not, therefore, allude to the more useful and practical nature of the knowledge imparted, but to the more kindly manner in which this is done. The stories our grandfathers tell us about their schoolmasters almost make our hair stand on end. They seem to have been the veriest tyrants in existence. They taught their pupils as bears are taught to dance, simply by flogging, and never dreamed that the little learning that they had to communicate could be drilled in by any other process. To the axiom of the wise man, he that spareth the rod hateth the child. He that spareth the rod hateth the child. They gave the fullest and most literal interpretation. The teachers of our day are discovering much milder and more effectual modes of imparting knowledge. Children are coming to be regarded as beings who have affections to be won and understandings to be appealed to. And of course, the birch and the strap are fast disappearing. Now we hold this state of things to be one of the surest indications of an improved moral tone in society. No teacher who reflects that the child committed to his charge is an immortal creature like himself, no man whose mind is imbued with true Christian benevolence, and such only are entitled to hold the high position of instructors of youth, will seek to impart knowledge through the medium of cruelty. In fact, anyone who should attempt to do so could not compete in this market. His methods would not work, or it would work so lamely in contrast with the far more effectual systems of which kindness is the basis, that he would be compelled to change it or be driven from the field. Who can estimate the progress future generations, trained up under these better principles, are yet destined to make in knowledge and virtue? In many of the other relations of society, the same tendencies may be seen in operation. There are a great number of good, kind people in the world just at this moment. Let anyone look around among his friends and neighbors and try to reckon up the various acts of real benevolence they have performed towards himself, the many obligations he has received from persons who had nothing to expect from him except perhaps his thanks, and he will be surprised at the largeness of the catalogue. Such people may not be Christians in the highest sense of that high title, but the power of Christianity constrains them notwithstanding. They look at our benevolent institutions, our hospitals, our infirmaries, our societies for the relief of the stranger and destitute, our Bible and missionary associations, to say nothing of the heroism which inspires high-souled and disinterested men to go forth to distant regions, braving pestilence and famine and the cruelties of savage tribes, to communicate the glad tidings of great joy. There are not a few philosophers who puzzle themselves to account by other causes than the real one for the progress society has made. They would seek these in the heights above or the depths beneath, rather than in those sovereign principles by which the diffused spirit of Christianity speaks everywhere to their own hearts. Some ascribe the improved tone of manners and morals to a vague necessity of advancement, impressed that they neither know how nor why on human affairs. Others look for its cause in the progress of commercial intercourse, and place the gradual regeneration of the world to the account of mere selfishness. Others again think they have found it in the diffusion of secular knowledge, and regard intellect as the great ameliorator of the world. Such persons are not perhaps willfully blind, but they show how willing men are to take credit to themselves for blessings which they owe entirely to the bounty of heaven. There is in the world one power, omnipotent and everlasting, and that power is love, the gift of Christ. No social institution can conflict with it. No one based on it will ever perish. It possesses a creative and sustaining energy which nothing can resist. Pride, ambition, anger, all merely human passions, exhaust themselves and leave desolation behind, but their effects soon disappear, and on the ruins they have ceased, divine love rears new structures which will last forever. That silent but sure progress of society, which the atheist ascribes to an aimless necessity, the Christian regards as the natural operation of the principles of the gospel, and he views the extended intercourse and diffused knowledge of the times as vehicles whereby its principles may be more widely communicated. These principles go forth to an assured triumph, For their great law is the perfection of all things, the law of benevolence, of love. These remarks are thrown out chiefly as hints for reflection, and not without the conviction that there is much to detract from the cheerfulness of the view we have taken. The law of kindness, the obligation of continually doing good, still requires to be far more universally felt. Even good men who would little relish to be called unchristian must be conscious of a frequent tendency to act as though it admitted of some exceptions and reservations. There is current among the French a legend of one of their early confessors, which very quickly embodies the operation of this tendency. Craving the indulgence of the reader, we shall offer it in illustration, the more readily as it may excuse us from any seeming encroachment on the province of the pulpit. Listen then to this parable of the hermit of Gaul. At a time when the majority of the tribes of Gaul were yet ignorant of the gospel of Christ, there lived an old man called Novaire. It's spelled Novaire. So an old man called Novaire, who freely received the glad tidings and diligently sought to comprehend them thoroughly. Abandoning the pleasures of the world, he retired to a solitary hill near the place where Lillebonne now stands, and there reared a cabin of turf, where he dwelt alone, alternately occupied in endeavors to expand his own views and to communicate the truth to the people round about. Here it came to pass, after much meditation and prayer, that the dark veil which shrouds the invisible world from mortal view was lifted from his eyes, and he was permitted to gaze on the pathways of the sky without losing his ken of earthly things. He distinguished at the same time the secrets of the visible and the invisible universe. His vision wandered over the woods, the plains, the waters, then, glancing higher, it embraced the region traversed by the messengers of light, while, above all, it penetrated into the celestial habitations. He listened devoutly to the music of the spheres, the voice of the cherubim, and the hosannas of the blessed. Angels brought his food and freely discoursed to him on these secrets which are hidden from the world. Thus his days passed in a perpetual and heavenly delight. Familiarized to the intercourse of pure intelligences, he gradually felt all vulgar ambitions dying away within him, as the lessening stars vanish before the sun, and, proud of a knowledge thus lifted above the earth, he wished still further to penetrate the mysteries of God. While listening to the living accents which composed the eternal hymn of the creation to the glory of its author, he constantly said to himself, "Why cannot I understand what the birds utter in their songs, the breezes in their whisperings, the insects in their hummings, the waves in their rollings, the angels in their celestial hymns? In these ought to be found the great law which rules the world." But all the efforts of his mind to penetrate so profound a mystery were useless. He acquired nothing by his endeavors save hardness of heart and spiritual pride. His visits of mercy to the plain became less frequent, and his intercourse with its inhabitants more haughty and supercilious. For the growth of knowledge by itself can only be likened to that of the trees of the forest, which cannot extend their roots without drying up all around them. That knowledge may be beneficent and fruitful, it is necessary it should be watered from the fountains of the heart. One day, when the hermit had descended from his mountain, which preserved a perpetual verdure, in order to traverse the wintry valley below, he saw coming from another direction a numerous group of men who were leading a criminal to the scaffold. The peasants gathered to see him pass and spoke loudly of his crimes. Out the doomed one smiled as he heard them, and far from giving any sign of repentance, he seemed to glory in his past misdeeds. At length, as he passed the recluse, he all at once stopped and cried out in a tone of raillery, "Come here, holy man, and give your blessing and the kiss of peace to one who is going to die." But Noverre indignantly repulsed him, saying, "Pass on to your fate, miserable wretch. Pure lips may not be contaminated by contact with such as thee." The poor creature turned away without further reply, and Noverre, still agitated, proceeded onward to his hermitage. But when, arriving there, he paused with a look of consternation, the aspect of everything had changed. The trees, which the presence of angels had preserved in perennial verdure, had become leafless as those of the valley. There, where a few hours before the blossoming eglantine had exhaled its delightful fragrance, the white hoar-frost was glistening, and the scanty and withered moss revealed the bare rocks beneath. Noverre longed anxiously for the coming of the celestial messenger, who every day brought him his food, to learn the cause of this sudden change. But the messenger appeared not. The invisible world was closed to him, and he was thrown back into the ignorance and miseries of humanity. He understood that God had punished him, though he guessed not the fault he had committed. However, he submitted without murmuring, and kneeling on the hill, "Since I have offended thee, O my Creator," said he, "I am worthy of the utmost punishment thou mayest inflict. From this day I shall quit my solitude, and I vow to travel straight on, without other repose than that of the night, till thou art graciously pleased to vouchsafe me some visible token of thy forgiveness." With these words, Noverre took up his staff, girded his loins with a leathern belt, fastened his sandals, and casting a parting look on his beloved residence, he directed his course toward the wild peninsula which, at a later time, received the name of the Land of Blossoms. In this country, now covered with villages, farmsteads, and cultivated fields, no path could then be traced except that worn by the footsteps of the unreclaimed beasts of the forest. In his toilsome way, he had to ford rivers, traverse morasses, penetrate thickets, sometimes finding at wide intervals a few poor habitations whose masters frequently refused him entrance. But Noverre suffered all these fatigues and privations with great serenity. Sustained by the hope of once more recovering the lost favor of heaven, he opposed resignation to grief and patience to all obstacles. In this way he at length arrived at the extremity of the peninsula, not far from the spot where the celebrated abbey of Jumages, spelled Jumiege, Jumages, sorry, Jumages. The celebrated abbey of Jumages was afterward built. So we have a little asterisk here. Let's see what that's all about. A little footnote. The peninsula alluded to is formed by the windings of the Seine, a little below Rouen in Normandy. The Abbey of Jumages was founded in the 7th century and became one of the most distinguished religious houses in France. It is now in ruins. Okay, here a forest then extended, whose recesses afforded shelter to pirates, who in the light shallow, who in light shallops of osier covered with skins. Don't know what any of that is. Light shallops of osier covered with skins attacked the ships which passed up and down the river laden with merchandise. One evening, as the traveler quickened his pace to reach the banks, he came upon an open glade, where 4 of these outlaws were seated round a fire of dried brushwood. At sight of him they rose, ran toward him, and brought him near the fire, the more easily to despoil him. They seized his book, his cincture, his garment, and seeing that he had nothing else, they deliberated whether he should then be set at liberty. But the oldest of them, named Todoric, suggested that he be kept, and made to row the boat, to which the others agreed. Noverre was then bound with chains, and became the slave of the 4 pirates. He was compelled to cook for them, to clean their arms, mend the boat, and sometimes to steer it, receiving no other recompense for his labor than blows and hard words. Todoric especially showed him little pity, and joining raillery to cruelty, constantly demanded of the poor prisoner what availed the power of his god. One day, however, the 4 pirates assailed a vessel descending the Seine, which they supposed to be laden with rich merchandise. But it so happened that she contained a body of armed men, who saluted them with a shower of arrows so well directed that 3 of the bandits were killed on the spot, and the 4th, who was Todoric, received a wound in the body, apparently mortal. Noverre then turned the prow of the shallop toward the river bank, which he succeeded in gaining. He now at length found himself at liberty, and his first impulse was to fly from a place where he had endured such misery. But touched with pity for those who had so long injured him, he gave sepulture to the 3 slain pirates, and then approached Todoric. The unhappy man, judging Noverre by his own savage disposition, supposed that he would now take vengeance for the cruelty he had shown him, and said, "Kill me, but do not torture me." But Noverre replied, "So far from taking thy life, my friend, I shall do all in my power to save it." The pirate was astonished and deeply moved. "That is not in the power of man," said he, "for I feel the chill of death creeping fast round my heart. But if you indeed wish well to me, notwithstanding all I have made you suffer, give me a little water to quench my thirst." Noverre ran to the nearest spring and brought water to the wounded man. When he had drunk, he raised his eyes, now fast glazing in death, and looked steadily on the hermit. "Thou hast truly returned good for evil," he said, faintly. "Wilt thou do yet more, and accord the kiss of peace to a guilty and dying creature?" "I will, cheerfully," said Noverre, "and may it prove to thee a sign of pardon from that merciful God, whose law thou hast so long broken, and whom thou hast offended more deeply than thou couldst any of his creatures." With these words he knelt beside the pirate, who received the kiss of peace and immediately expired. At the same instant, a voice resounding through the air uttered these words, "Noverre, thy trial is at end. God has punished thee for having refused thy pity to one who was merely guilty. Thou shalt now be rewarded for having blessed him who was thine enemy. All the treasure thou didst lose by hardness of heart thou hast regained by a victorious charity. Raise then thine eyes, and open thine ears, for now again thou canst hear the voices of the earth and of the heavens." Noverre, who had listened to the voice, mute and trembling, raised his head. The trees, blighted by the blast of winter, seemed all at once to have become verdant. The frozen brooks again flowed in their channels. The birds sang among the blossoming shrubs, while high in heaven he beheld, like Jacob, the angels ascending and descending on their mission to the earth, the cherubim sailing amid the clouds, the archangels flashing their swords of fire, and the saints chanting their celestial hymns. And all these several sounds formed one harmonious anthem, of which the ever-recurring burden was, love one another. Then Noverre pressed his forehead to the ground and exclaimed, Mercy, O Father, ever blessed, this day have I indeed learned what is the great law.